Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another news and rumor video. We're looking at some signings from the first week of May. We're also looking at a couple of injury updates, some news updates involving some coaches, some GMs, and a couple of other things. And we've got some trade rumors involving the Maple Leafs, the Golden Knights, the Minnesota Wild, and a couple of other teams. We'll go to all the updates from our past couple of days coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below. We're on the road to 500 subscribers, and also don't forget to leave a comment. It really does help with the channel, and I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on all that was discussed here today. So in today's video, we've got another news and rumor video to discuss. Lots of intriguing things that happened from our past couple of days. We're going to start off, as we usually do in these videos, we're talking about some signings. There were 10 signings we're going to talk about here today from the first week of May, so we'll touch on all of these updates here. We got a couple of ELCs first, as the New Jersey Devils have signed right-wing prospect, 5th round pick, 129th overall back in the 2019 draft, Arsenij Grzuski, to a 1-year ELC with an AAV of $925,000. And that contract will begin at the start of next year. So Grzuski is a very interesting pickup there for the Devils. Didn't get into any NHL action. I think he was playing over in the KHL if I'm correct, but Grzuski looks like eventually he's going to be a very fantastic middle six winger there for the New Jersey Devils. So interesting note there, but that's a solid ELC pickup there for the Devils. The other ELC we saw was for the Florida Panthers, as they signed right shot defenseman, 4th round pick, 125th overall back in the 2022 draft, Ludvig Jansen, to a 3-year ELC with an AAV of $855,000. Jansen looks like eventually could be a decent third pair defenseman, so that's another solid sign there, as the Florida Panthers have signed Jansen to an ELC. Then we saw a couple of other signings. First, in the Boston Bruins organization, as they have signed Patrick Brown, who is in the final year of a 2-year deal with an AAV of $800,000, to a 1-year extension league minimum, gone to 15 games this year at the NHL level, putting up 1 assist, was mostly an AHL guy. He's a very good call-up option, can play bottom 6 minutes, but can also play at the AHL level and be called up if need be. So a very interesting sign there from the Boston Bruins, as they have signed Patrick Brown to a new deal. Then we saw the Ottawa Senators sign one of their up-and-coming young defensemen to a new deal, and that was Nicholas Matinpalo. Matinpalo, who was in the final year of a 1-year deal, signed a 2-year contract extension with an AAV of $875,000. He was an undrafted guy, but had a goal and 4 points in 41 games. He's sort of the 6th, 7th defenseman this year, but after the solid play, especially in the playoffs, I would not be one bit surprised if he was a solid third pair defenseman come next year. So 2 years at $875,000 is a steal for what Matinpalo brings. So really good stuff there for Ottawa. Then we saw Tampa Bay Lightning send 27-year-old left shot defenseman, undrafted player Charlie Edward de Astos to a 1-year deal with AAV of league minimum. The Astos, I think, could be a solid AHL player, maybe a call-up option for the Bolts on the blue line, so interesting note there. Then we saw St. Louis Blues sign AHL player Will Cranley to a 1-year league minimum deal. Cranley was in the final year of his ELC. I think Cranley eventually could maybe challenge like a backup role in 2-3 years, so 1-year at league minimum is not overly bad. We saw the Edmonton Oilers sign Alec Regula to a 2-year contract extension with an AAV of league minimum. Regula, who I think was a waiver claim, at the very beginning of the season. He's a right shot defenseman, was in the final year of a 1-year deal. Didn't get into any NHL action this year. I think he still could be a decent depth defenseman or a call-up option for the Edmonton Oilers. So just note there, Regula has signed a 2-year extension to remain in the Edmonton Oilers organization. Then we saw the New York Rangers sign one of their acquisitions at the trade deadline, and that was Juuso Parssinen. Parssinen, who's an RFA, was in the final year of a 1-year deal league minimum, gets a 2-year extension with the AAV of $1.25 million. Parssinen bounced around this year. He started the season in Nashville, then was dealt to Colorado, then was dealt to New York. He had combined 6 goals and 16 points in 48 games with those 3 teams combined. So very interesting stuff there. Parssinen shown he can be a really solid bottom 6 forward. So he's going to stay around just over $1 million AAV, a little bit of a pay bump. So I think the Rangers have liked what Parssinen has been able to bring, so they bring him back. Then we saw Carolina Hurricanes take maybe the top free agent goaltender off the market, as Frederik Andersen, who's in the final year of a 2-year deal, signs a 1-year extension to stay in Carolina with an AAV of $2.75 million. Andersen this year played 22 games for the Carolina Hurricanes, dealt with a lot of injury troubles again, had a 2.50 GAA, 899 save percentage, but he has been brilliant in the playoffs. So I do think that 2.75 for 1 year, like Andersen when healthy, is probably a top 15 goaltender in the NHL. So this sort of a deal, it's really low risk. Although I do think at some point the Carolina Hurricanes will have to prioritize who their goaltender of the future will be after Andersen. Will it be Kochetkov, or will they have to go out and get someone? So interesting out there, but Andersen is going to be staying with the Carolina Hurricanes one more season. And lastly, the biggest contract extension over this time frame was in Calgary. As we saw, the Calgary Flames signed Matt Coronato, who was an RFA, and just finished his ELC, signed a massive extension. He gets a 7-year contract extension with an AAV of $6.5 million. Coronato, who was a 13th overall pick back in the 2021 draft, had a career season this year, putting up 24 goals and 47 points in 77 games. He was tied for third on the team in points. He was third on the team in goal scoring. Like, Coronato had a really good breakout season. Looks like he's going to be potentially like a 30, maybe even 35 goal scorer and like a 60, 70 point player at his peak maybe. So Coronato looks like he's got a very good future in Calgary, and they've signed him quickly. So 7 years, $6.5 million. If Coronato can produce what he could potentially produce, I think this could be a really good steal of a deal for the Flames. So all in all, some really good, interesting signings. We saw a couple of lower end signings. We saw a guy like Gratuski sign in New Jersey on an ELC, and then we saw a couple of big extensions, including Coronato in Calgary and Andersen in Carolina. So some very interesting stuff there. Those are all signings we're going to talk about here today. Next, going over to the injury updates. So when we look at the injury updates, we got a couple of things to talk about here. So according to a couple of recent reports, it sounds like Mattias Ekholm and Calvin Pickard are both progressing well. They will not be ready for at least the first 2 games in Dallas of the Western Conference Final, but it does sound like it could be ready for future games, whether that be Game 3, Game 4, Game 5 if necessary. It sounds like they could be available at some point later on in the series, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But it sounds like Ekholm and Pickard will be ready to come back from their respective injuries later on into the Western Conference Final. Nico Hischier has been ruled out of the rest of the World Championship tournament due to sustaining a muscular injury. He should be ready to go for training camp, but that's a bad blow there for the Devils captain. Chicago's Lucas Reichel has also been ruled out of the rest of the World Championship due to an undisclosed injury. Once again, should be ready for training camp, but still it's a bad blow there for one of the young Chicago players. Washington's Alexei Protas is having tests done on his foot to see if he needs surgery. He missed a big chunk of the rest of the regular season, as well as a little bit of the playoffs due to that injury, so we'll see if Protas is going to need surgery on his foot. Carolina's Jalen Chatfield missed Game 5 due to an undisclosed injury of the second round of that series. It did end, so his status for the Eastern Conference Final is uncertain. He may miss the first 2 games, which would be a bad blow there for the Hurricanes. Toronto's Matthew Knies, who left Game 6 with an undisclosed injury, was good to go for Game 7, so that's really good stuff there. While Anthony Stolarz missed his 6th straight game in Game 7 due to upper body injuries. So Stolarz and the Leafs are now eliminated. I do think Stolarz will be ready to go for training camp, but that's a bad blow there for the Leafs. However, it was good to see that Matthew Knies was good enough to play Game 7. Florida's Evan Rodriguez, who missed 2 straight games with an undisclosed injury, returned to game action in Game 7, so that was a big boost there for Florida. Rodriguez is a very fantastic top 6 forward there in the Florida Panthers organization, so good to see that he was brought back. Josh Morrissey left Game 6 with a knee injury, and it seems like he will be out for some time. He probably would have missed the Western Conference Final. That was a horrible leg injury for Morrissey. We'll have to wait and see if he'll be ready to go for training camp. That's a bad blow there for the Jets. Ottawa's Nick Jensen underwent surgery to repair his lower body injury he was dealing with, and maybe out a little bit longer than training camp, so we'll have to wait and see if he is going to be ready for training camp or maybe close to the start of the season. But Nick Jensen has had offseason surgery there for Ottawa. And lastly, Sonny Milano, who suffered a lower body injury back in November, may not be ready to start next season. He suffered a setback around the trade deadline, and it seems like he may miss the start of the season for the Capitals. So interesting to note, there's some interesting injury updates from the past couple of days. Good to see guys like Rodriguez, Knies, and Ekholm all either get back into game action or near a return, and hopefully they don't look too bad in their returns. With bad news to see guys like Hischier, Morrissey, and Jensen all be out with injuries, and hopefully they won't be out until training camp. But interesting injury updates from our past couple of days. Next, going over to a couple of interesting coaching and GM updates and things like that. So first, with the Pittsburgh Penguins, it seems like Jay Leach, David Quinn, and Jay Woodcroft have all interviewed for the vacant Pittsburgh Penguins head coaching option. So it's going to be very interesting to note there. I do think that all those guys will have very good likelihood of becoming the new Penguins Penguins head coach. Woodcroft has spent a couple of years in Edmonton a couple of years back. David Quinn spent time in San Jose in the Rangers organization being a head coach. Leach, I don't think has too much coaching experience, but is another option there for the Penguins. So it's not the final three for sure. There's other guys who have interviewed, but we have heard that Woodcroft, Leach, and Quinn have all interviewed for the Penguins head coaching job, and all could wind up ending up with it. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to the LA Kings. I forgot to mention this in my last video, but Ken Holland has been made the new GM in Los Angeles. There's a lot of speculation that that was going to happen, and it officially has. So very interesting note there for the Kings. It's a 3-year deal, so it's not a longer term deal. Not really a 1 to 2 year deal either, so it's sort of like a mid-term deal. But after letting go of Rob Blake, Holland is now going to be the new GM in LA, and hopefully he can turn this team around enough that they are able to win in round 1 next year, something that they have not been able to do since they went to the Cup final back in 2014. It's been a while for the Los Angeles Kings. So interesting note there, but Ken Holland is now the new GM in Los Angeles. Keeping with the GM stuff, New York Islanders are now interviewing Marc Bergevin and Matthew Darche to be their new GM in the Islanders organization. It sounds like both of them have a legit shot to try and become the new GM in New York, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But Bergevin, who has previous experience being a GM at the NHL level, being the GM for the Montreal Canadiens a couple of years back, and Darche, who's been a really good front office piece in Tampa, are both going to be interviewing for the Islanders option, so we'll have to wait and see on that. According to a couple of reports as well, interim head coach Brad Shaw will not be back with the Philadelphia Flyers, instead of potentially being an assistant coach or a coach in some other role. After Tocchet got the head coaching job in Philadelphia, Brad Shaw's made it known that he won't be back in Philadelphia, so very interesting stuff there, but Shaw will not be back with Philadelphia. And when it comes to Chicago, a couple of recent reports have come out saying that Jeff Blashill, former Red Wings head coach when they started their rebuild, is the leading contender for the Chicago Blackhawks head coaching vacancy. So we know that the Blackhawks are looking for someone to become their new head coach, and it seems like Jeff Blashill is the leading contender. I'm not sure if that's the right move for the Blackhawks. I definitely think they could go in a different direction. I'm not sure if Blashill is the right fit for a younger team like that, but we'll have to wait and see, as it seems like Blashill is the leading contender for Chicago. So lots of interesting stuff from our past couple of days, but Bergevin and Darche might be the two finalists in the Islanders organization. Holland will be the new GM in Los Angeles. Leach, Woodcroft, and Quinn have all been interviewing with the Pittsburgh Penguins for their head coaching vacancy. Blashill's the leading contender for Chicago, and Shaw will not be back with the Philadelphia Flyers. So very interesting stuff there. And lastly, going over to a couple of trade rumors. When it comes to trade rumors, we got a couple of things to talk about. Now, I've seen a couple of recent reports saying that the Vegas Golden Knights may be willing to move off of a defender this offseason. Now, we looked at this team. The Knights were just recently eliminated by the Edmonton Oilers, so there's going to be a lot of change. We know that every time Vegas gets eliminated early on, there's lots of changes with that team. So it seems like they are going to be looking to probably try and add some more forward help. It seems like the consensus, not only around Vegas fans, but also around media talking about Vegas, is that the Golden Knights will be trying to add some more forward firepower, maybe in the top 6, maybe in the top 9. Could see them try and go after a guy like Ehlers or Bether or Marner, or could see them try and go elsewhere. We'll have to wait and see on that, but they will be trying to add some forward help, and that has led to a lot of people thinking that they could move a defenseman. Now, they don't have too much cap space right now, so moving a defenseman to try and free up some cap space or to try and help them get a forward would be a very smart move there for the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, if you look at their defense, if you look at who they could potentially try and move, they have Whitecloud on a long-term deal, McNabb's on a long-term deal, Pietrangelo is one of their best defensemen, Theodore and Hannafin were just signed to long-term extensions. So with that in mind, they also have Ben Hutton and Lucas Cormier, who could definitely play as like depth defensemen. So with that in mind, it comes down to really two options. That's Kane Korzak and Nick Hague. Hague has been the one Vegas Golden Knights prospect that's actually been able to grow with the team. There have been a couple that have been able to come through since then, but from that original Vegas Golden Knights draft, Hague, who was their first ever second round pick, has been doing great for the Vegas Golden Knights, but he's an RFA. He was just making $2.9 million. He's probably going to want to pay him to like $3.5–4 million. I don't think the Golden Knights are going to be willing to pay that. Korzak still got a year left, and he's on a rookie deal. So with that in mind, it seems like Nick Hague is probably the most likely trade candidate for the Knights. They trade him, they free up some cap space. Guys like Korzak, Hutton, Cormier could all fill into that last spot in the third pair, or they could try and go after a cheap defenseman in free agency. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but with the Golden Knights most likely wanting to go after some forward help, do not not be surprised if they try and move off of a defender, so keep your eye on that. Next, going over to the Philadelphia Flyers, according to a recent report I was seeing from Philadelphia, it says that Bobby Brink is potentially on the trade block for Philadelphia Flyers. Now, Brink didn't have an overly bad season. I think he had 5-10 goals, 25-ish points. He had a decent season for Philadelphia Flyers, but nothing overly substantial. And I think he's a year away from a restricted free agency status. So with that in mind, it seems like the Flyers don't have too many trade chips at this point in time. They're not trading Tippett, they're not trading Couturier, not trading Konechny, not trading Sanheim, not trading Draisaitl, not trading any of these guys. The biggest one is definitely Rasmus Ristolainen. A secondary one might be one of their younger players to try and just give them a fresh start, and Brink falls into that category. I think he's got 1, maybe 2 years of NHL experience under his belt now. So it'll be interesting to see. He's still signed for this year. It wouldn't be guaranteed if he stayed in Philadelphia. With maybe a third line guy, maybe he will flourish in the Rick Tocchet system. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But I have seen some people say that Brink might be one of the more likelier trade candidates for the Philadelphia Flyers, and I can agree with that given the fact the Flyers do not have a whole bunch of players that they're going to be trading this offseason. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to the Minnesota Wild, I saw a couple of recent reports, which is what we've been hearing closer to the trade deadline too, saying that don't be surprised if the Minnesota Wild and Brock Nelson hooked up on a deal in free agency. There's a lot of talk about Nelson going to Minnesota at the trade deadline. However, Colorado was able to pull off the blockbuster deal with the Islanders. But Brock Nelson, who does have connections to Minnesota, given the fact that Minnesota's the state where he grew up, so he does have ties to Minnesota. He seems to have a good relationship with GM Bill Guerin, so I wouldn't even be surprised if Nelson maybe even took a pay cut to go to Minnesota, given the Minnesota Wild's tough cap situation. So we're going to have to wait and see on that, but I don't think it comes to anyone's surprise that Minnesota and Brock Nelson could hook up on a free agent deal. I think a smart move for the Minnesota Wild would be a 2 to 3 year deal around a $4 to $4.5 million AAV. I think there are other teams out there who could outpay the Minnesota Wild, but I do think that if Nelson really wanted to go to Minnesota, he might take a pay bump. So we're going to have to wait and see on that, but do not be surprised if we continue to hear Brock Nelson going to Minnesota over the next little while as we get closer and closer to free agency. And lastly, going over to Toronto Maple Leafs, they were just recently, over the past couple of days, eliminated from playoff contention, and thus begins Marner watch. There's been a whole bunch of reports I've seen after the Leafs were eliminated from Chris Johnston. There were a couple of other reporters, all around Toronto media, have been saying Mitch Marner is very, very, very unlikely to come back. It seems like Marner has been just as frustrated as the Leafs have been with being in Toronto, and it seems like Marner's a guy who needs a fresh start. So as much as it seemed like Toronto did offer him a really big deal in season to try and keep him, it seems like Marner's heading closer and closer to free agency. I'm not saying it's a guarantee. Maybe his mind shifts changes. That is a possibility, but I'm not going to say it's a guarantee. And Marner is very likely to hit free agency and probably be the cream of the crop in this year's free agent market. Now, some people think that he could push $13 million. I think he'll probably get between 11 and 12. I think he'll get more than what he was making before. I don't know if he'll be able to become the highest paid player in the NHL, surpassing guys like Draisaitl and Matthews. I'm not sure if he'll be able to do that. I could see a team overpay him and maybe get him to the 30 million mark. That's a possibility, but I've seen plenty of fan bases say they want to go after Marner. I've seen Canucks fans say that, Knights fans say that, Kings fans say that, Islanders fans say that, Sabres fans say that, some Senators fans say it. I have seen a lot of teams, and given how good of a player Marner is, even if not in the playoffs, he is a 90-100 point consistent player in the regular season. So I think there's going to be a couple of teams out there who would be willing to overpay. Now, once again, if you're going to a team like Vegas or a Dallas with the tax situation, it could be a little bit lower. So you could see a Vegas or a Dallas or a Carolina maybe pay him $11.5 million, but that would be the equivalent to a $30 million contract elsewhere. So we're gonna have to wait and see on that, but Marner watch has begun with the Leafs now being eliminated, and I have no clue at this point where Marner could go, because I think there is a case for most of other teams out there to try and sign Mitch Marner. So we're gonna have that's when we see on that. But that's what I'm going to talk about for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Where do you think Marner winds up signing, and how much money do you think he winds up making? Because it doesn't seem like he's going back to Toronto. Do you think Nelson could go to Minnesota? Do you think that Brink will get traded by the Philadelphia Flyers? And do you think the Knights will move a defenseman, probably Nick Hague, in this year's offseason? Definitely let your thoughts on all of that, plus the coaching and GM updates, the injury updates, and all the signings I talked about in today's video. Definitely let your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video and feel free to subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. Also a blog, tell me news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I'll go check that in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.